Welcome back, my jump-in kiddos. It's good to be back with you one more week before I disappear. And this week I am here as Moses to finish the story of how God used me in a special and miraculous way to help deliver my Israelites, his chosen people, to freedom. Now, if you remember last week, we talked about how it took those 10 plagues, how I had to go to Pharaoh and ask him 10 times, Pharaoh, let God's people go. But Pharaoh over and over again said, no, I will not do it, until finally that 10th plague. Remember the 10th plague? The Passover, where the angel came and took the firstborn child of the Egyptians who did not have the blood of the Passover lamb on their door. And after all that happened, Pharaoh let them go. But not long after Pharaoh let the Israelites go, as I was leading them out into the desert, Pharaoh decided he made a terrible, terrible mistake. He couldn't believe. He said yes. So he got together all his chariots and his horsemen and his soldiers, and he sent them out chasing after us. So we were walking along, and we could hear in the distance the sound of armies, the sound of horses, the thumping of feet. Thump, 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 thump. They were on their way to come and get us and take us back to be slaves again. And our people started to cry out in fear. Pharaoh and the Egyptian soldiers are coming to get us. Why, Moses? Why have you taken us out of our slavery and taken us out into the desert? And I had to remind them that God always tells us to trust in him and that everything will be okay. So we got to the edge of the water, to the rivers. And God instructed me, take your mighty staff, O Moses, and bang it on the waters. And when you bang it on the waters will part in an amazing and miraculous way. And they did. And lead your people, Moses, through the dry ground of the waters. So we did. All of us walked on the dry ground between the two sides of the waters. The waters were trembling and flowing all over, but they did not come near us. And when we got to the other side, God then said, bang the staff one more time, and the waters will go back. Pharaoh and the soldiers were on the dry ground in the middle of the waters, and when the waters went back, they could chase us no more. They had to swim. They got stuck. Many of them didn't make it, and they were stuck on the other side, and we were free. So we got to continue the journey, and the journey lasted a long, long time. Some days the people would grumble and be angry. Moses, why have you taken us out of here? What's going to happen? Where are we going to go? When are we going to get there to the promised land, Moses? And I, some days, lost my patience with those Israelites. But at the same time, God said, trust, trust, trust. Trust that I'm leading you, Moses. Trust that I'm going to take care of you, Moses. And trust, Moses, when we get to that promised land, that special place, we will be a free people, a new people, where great things go on. So as we're traveling there, as we're getting closer, God said, you know, Moses, after all these years of the Israelites being these slaves in captivity to the Egyptians, now that they're free, they need to know how to behave. So God called me up to the top of the mountain, Mount Sinai. And God said, give to the people what would be known as the 10 Commandments. He gave me 2 tablets. And he said, write down these commandments. You shall have no other gods. You shall not make wrongful use of the name of the Lord your God. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. Honor your father and your mother. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, male slave, female slave, donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. So I came down from the mountain, and I brought these 10 commandments, and I gave them to the people. And I said, God has commanded you to live by his law, to live by his 10 commandments. And the more you live God's people by the 10 Commandments, the more you trust that what God has said for you and God has done for you is best for you, the easier your life will go. The less you will have to struggle with sin. But don't forget, God also reminded me, when you trust in me, even when you break the commandments, even when you sin, I will set you free. I will show you love. So, the people started living by the commandments. We continued our journey through the desert. So finally the day came. I was pretty old. And I got to the top of the mountain. And I could look down and see the promised land. And the people entered into the promised land. They made it into Israel. They became their own nation. And God loved them. And God cared for them. And God indeed showed them love and forgiveness. So that was the way that God used me, just humble, broken Moses, somebody who had to float as a baby in the Nile and get adopted by the Pharaoh's daughter, someone who sometimes lost his temper, sometimes I didn't trust enough in God, sometimes, like when I was getting called by the burning bush, I didn't want to do what God said. But God used me, and God helped me lead the Israelites to their freedom. And in the same way, what you should know from all the stories that we've shared all these many weeks is God does the same for you. God can call you, and even when you're hesitant, when you trust in God, God will lead you to where you need to go. So thank you. It's been a great time sharing these stories with you. May God bless you until we meet again, especially in heaven.